Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Rad Season Show. I'm excited to be joined today by adventurer, Everest summiter, expedition leader, entrepreneur, and founder of Ian Taylor Trekking, the man himself, Ian Taylor. Ian, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. A little
No
bit
worries.
tired. Good to be here.
Yeah, you must be tired. You just come back from Kilimanjaro a couple of days ago, right?
Yeah, just got on a long 40-hour journey all the way from Kilimanjaro. Missed one flight. Almost missed my connection all the way back to the US, and now I'm here. It's kind of wild. We were out skiing yesterday and just doing a couple hours just to get some exercise in. And then, I'm like, oh, 4 days ago, we were on the top of Kilimanjaro and then back in Colorado. Kind of surreal, but especially in COVID times and pandemic travel. But it was doable. It was fun. It was challenging, but yeah, it was good to be back with our staff in Kilimanjaro.
Nice. And how did it all go? Like with considering with the current situation and getting everyone out there and.
Yeah, I suppose it's always nerve-wracking to go to a place where they haven't recorded COVID tests since June 2020. And when there's no record of any cases. So, you can either believe that or not. But yeah, going there that's a little daunting, going into a place where nobody's wearing masks, nobody is protecting themselves or protecting us. The good thing is there was very few people there.
Yeah.
Although there were people there, and on the mountain there was a few days, which was quite amazing. Going like the route through the Lamosha route, the western side of Kilimanjaro that we go up, there was nobody there. The whole thing is overgrown. So literally there was like a foot of a trail, and everything was like above our heads in certain places. So it was like back, 20 years ago when that route was like developed. It was bushwhacking through Kilimanjaro to get up, up onto the higher elevation. So it was quite amazing on a number of different fronts. But yeah, we had in the first group we had like 8 people, and then 12 in the second group, and no issues with anything. People came in with a negative PCR test, wore masks. All our staff were tested. Went up on the mountain, no issues, all the way through both trips, and went up and down twice back to back. And came all the way back, and I think there's only a few people left on the ground, and everyone else is home and safe. So it's great.
Wow! And how many guides were with you?
Well, on the second trip, we had 51 staff with us on the mountains. So we have massive support on Kilimanjaro. People carrying big dome tents and 4-person tents for the clients to sleep in, and single tents, and then we have cooks, support staff, kitchen staff. Like there's usually 6 or 7 people in the kitchen. Then we have servers, security staff. Not that we needed them this time. But that's the amount of support that a Kilimanjaro trip takes. Logistically, it's a massive operation.
Yeah.
But our boys, most of them we worked with for a decade, and then our head guide, who's voted Kilimanjaro's #1 guide out of 4,000 guides. They just do an amazing job at looking after every little detail, so that all the clients, all of us, can kind of sneak our way to the top and get back down again. So it's one of my favorite trips, I think, just because of the people, like the staff, the culture there, the camaraderie and the experience that these guys want to offer climbers and trekkers is something quite unique, really special. So it was good to be back, because they've had a tough year. I mean, we were able to raise, I think, $11,000 for them and $15,000 for our staff in Nepal. And they were like so thankful, so happy, and just ready to kind of get back to work. Everyone's like, let's go. When's the next trip? And I'm like, well, hang on a second. Let's get home first and see how things play out. So
yeah.
But yeah, it was good to be back.
Good stuff. Well, I'd love, I guess, to take it back to the beginning of how you actually got into trekking and mountaineering, because you grew up just outside Dublin, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, there's not that many mountains around there, in Ireland. So
it's funny. There's 3,000 foot or 1,000 meter peaks within an hour's drive of Dublin.
Yeah.
And I mean, my dad grew up in the mountains near a place called Glendalough, where I did most of my training for Everest. And I would be, because if there's a 2,000-foot hill, well, I can do it like 3 times in a row, and I can get in, 6,000 feet, or I can get in 3,000 meters of elevation if you want to. You just have to have the commitment to be able to come down and go back. And there were some times where I would do this loop of like 9 kilometers, and I would do it 3 times, and it was only maybe 1,800 meters, but you would pass people on the first one, then you'd pass them on the second one, and then they'd be like, "What the hell is this guy doing?" And then you'd like see them on the next one. But yeah, my dad was from Wicklow, which is south of Dublin, in Ireland. Then I went to university in Glasgow, so I spent some time in Glasgow. Or in Scotland, and I would go up to the Highlands. I suppose I was climbing from a young age. My dad used to go and work in my granny's house, and they would just drop us off, and back then you could do that. And I remember looking at some of these hills and looking at, like, always wanting to know what was like over the top of these hills. And I was like, well, if I go up there, what am I going to see? It's like an 8-year-old kid. And eventually I did go up, and I was like, wow, holy crap, there's like rivers and waterfalls and so much fun and adventure to be had. And I suppose that was the kind of initial, I remember some of those moments. And I remember my parents sending me on these Christian kind of adventure sports camps. And we would do rock climbing and abseiling and canoeing and river walking and just mountain activities. And I suppose all of those things, you remember, I suppose you either latch onto something, or if you have a bad experience, whether it's like falling into a swimming pool or a river and almost, maybe those are bad experiences. All the ones I had were like good experiences, ones that you're like, amazing. At like 9 years old, I met Graham, who was my my climbing partner on Everest. So those experiences when we were younger, kind of helped me kind of formulate ideas about what I should be doing with my life. I mean, you kind of go through then stages of, well, I got to go to college, and I got to do this, and I got to have money, or I got to have like a job or something that makes sense. And I suppose my parents were different. My dad was like constantly get a job with a pension. He was a teacher. So he had kind of a different view. My mother seemed to be just more relaxed about everything, just whatever, do whatever you want type of a thing. And you get, all these people that are around you, your environment produces you, helps you kind of think through all these things. And then you meet different people. Like I met Graham, Ken, she was like, he was just like, let's do everything. We were out cycling around Wicklow, like 100-mile cycles as teenagers, getting thrown out of hostels. For smoking cigarettes when we're like 15 years old. And you just kind of got to go through all these different things to kind of come out at the other end. And it was kind of weird that, 20 years later, after being 9 years old, at 29, standing on the top of Everest, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect that to happen, but your journey leads you to where you want to go to. And I think the desires and the abilities that we have, or the things that we think we are good at or not good at, we have to try and find out what those things are. And if we're not testing ourselves, we're not really developing or growing.
Yeah.
So I had this kind of, and everyone's different. I just had this desire to prove to myself that I was better than what I thought I was. And Everest just happened to be that kind of thing that I could, benchmark myself against, and then gave me the confidence to go on and do all the things that I've done.
Was it like that when you were in college as well? So when you were up in Glasgow, were you kind of looking at some of the climbs and just like around Scotland there and pushing yourself, do you reckon? Or
I mean, a little bit. I think a little bit of everything kind of came together to do that. I mean, in Scotland, I played on the soccer or football team, and we were going up into the mountains, but not as much as I would have liked. And I think there was a lot of pressure at that point to kind of get a degree, there was a different time in my life where I didn't have as much freedom to kind of think about things. So there was almost like an agenda of what I needed to do. But Scotland definitely opened my eyes. I mean, in the winter there, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's some of the harshest conditions that you can get in the mountains. I mean, here in Colorado, I mean, it's sunny skies every day. There's no wind. you know, what they call a storm here is just some snow blowing in and falling on the ground. I mean, it's like Scotland and Ireland and England have like real weather, real mountaineering conditions. So when we were faced with some other conditions, it was like, whoa, you know, Scotland was really like a good starting point for kind of knowing the reality of what the mountains can actually throw at people. But yeah, I think so. I think there was all these different things when I look back. You know, there was different people that kind of were like, you know what, you're talking about these things all the time, but I don't remember ever talking about them. Like my auntie said to me, "Oh, I remember you talking about Everest when you were in your teenage years." I don't remember that at all. So I don't remember ever saying to anybody that I was going to climb Everest. That really only happened in like 2005. So I don't know. I can't even. I'm 42 now, and I'm like, my brain is probably fried from so much altitude that I can't really go, you know, think too much on any of it. But there was definitely people at key times that kind of pushed me to kind of do, you know, get out there and follow your passions. And if, you know, people probably saw me as a kid running around the hills going, "Oh my God, this is amazing! What a gift." I probably didn't realize it at the time, but those people then years later would come back and be like, "You know what, follow this, do it. This is who you are. This is what you're meant to do." And you kind of just you absorb the information and put it in the back of your head, and then it comes back out 5 years later or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of a strange journey, I suppose, to go on, but and it's not the normal kind of pattern of what somebody normally does in their adult life. And even everything has been a risk. I mean, moving to the States, you know, 7 years ago, doing all of that. I mean, you have to take risk. You have to step out and do it. And if it doesn't work, there's always options for us. Yeah. And I think that's one thing I've learned, even though, you know, there's a set path of like, gotta go get a degree, get a job, yada, yada, yada. There's always options for us. If we want them, we can go out there and get them. So
nice. And you and Graham went traveling to South America, right? So is that when I've heard the story, and from what I understand, you were in Peru, and you overheard someone talking about Everest, and you guys kind of looked at each other and thought, you know what, we could give this a crack. We could try and climb it.
I think we were, you know, there's a range of things. We're sitting at 15,000 feet or whatever that is in meters, 4.6 in meters. And, you know, I remember waking up in some of the hotels, like gasping for breath because we were totally unacclimatized to the lack of oxygen. And I suppose I had tons of like experience climbing and hiking, and but no experience of altitude. And I think it was almost like a test. It was like, you know, what's this altitude thing? What are them, we had no idea of altitude and acclimatization and how you would do it properly. So it was really intriguing to us because this girl, Polly from England, was on the bus talking to, I think it was her boyfriend at the time. And it engaged everyone because everyone's like, yeah, this is cool. And then she started talking about, these treks to base camp and Everest and climbing Everest. And she wanted to do it. And I think she's got 3 kids now. So you never know. Maybe she'll go back. She will do it. But for us, this was like the challenge that we've been looking for. Mm-hmm. And, hiking in Peru or doing whatever we were doing. We were out there adventuring in whatever way we were doing it, but we were trying to figure out what was important to us. And it was, for me, it was an instant. I remember I was like, let's see if, like, literally on that bus, we're like, let's see if we can do this. And the minute we came home, we're like 2005, the end of 2005, we're like planning. So the next, like 6 months later, we're in the Himalayas. And then from there, we were in this bar in Namche Bazaar, which is like 3,500 meters up in the Everest region. And we put up this T-shirt, and it had like, all the some different peaks and treks and different things. And we ticked boxes, and then we left one open. It had Everest 2008 with an open box. And we put up the T-shirt, I think, on the 24th of May, 2006. And it was kind of ironic to come back, on on the 23rd, well, I stood on the top of Everest on the 23rd of May 2008. So within 2 years of kind of putting that T-shirt up on the wall and kind of, but that's when it started. We started planning, and I think that's what we started going, okay, well, we've done this, this, and this. There's a hell of a lot of stuff we don't know. How do we get there? And the kind of plan, like, it really was just, it's just persistence. It's just, you know, are we going to, like, how do we do it? Who do we talk to? What are the, like, how do we train? What about altitude? You know, you start thinking about all these different things and start writing down, okay, we need to find experts on VO2 max testing, and we need to get like personal trainers, and we got to like get our weight down to an acceptable level. And what's, you know, a good VO2 max test? Like, do we have the technical ability? How do we like gather all these different things? And 2 years is very aggressive. Looking back now, especially with the numbers that are on Everest now, I mean, 2 years is I train people for Everest now. And I had, even this morning, somebody emailed me, I'm starting from scratch. Where do I start with Everest? And on my last trip to Kili, I had a guy who was doing 2 trips back to back with me on Kili from Ireland. He lives in Portugal, but he was carrying like 10 kilos up every day, or more than that. And then on the summit night, he took up 10 kilos in weights, and he like dumps the weights on the top, and everyone's like, holy crap. And then he went down Kilimanjaro and then came back up again. And now he's going to Everest in a few months. And I'm working with like 10 or 12 people right now that are kind of on that journey towards Everest. So it's kind of an, you know, I learned a hell of a lot doing that trip and doing all of the trips that kind of led up to it. I made a lot of mistakes, and I saw a lot of companies that we worked with that were kind of like doing things in a very strange way. And that, I suppose, how Ian Taylor Trekking came about after Everest, but we can talk about that at another point. But that's ultimately how it happened.
And there was 4 mountains that you guys were trying to do, right, on 4 continents. Was that in preparation, do you think, for the final stop, which was going to be Everest? Was that sort of what you had in mind, or were you like, we want to do these 4 continents, we're going to pick these 4 mountains? And
I don't think the mountains were anything to do with leading up to Everest in a real way. It was more of a marketing thing where we were trying to attract sponsors. So by saying we're going to climb 4 mountains on 4 continents in a year, we thought that was the best avenue to go down to try and get some sponsorship. Because we were funding everything ourselves. And I mean, I moved back in with my parents. You know, when you're in your mid-20s going into your late 20s, you know, living, maybe it's normal now because stuff is so expensive, but it was like a big deal. Like living with my parents, I spent, like, they took money off me for rent, and then eventually they gave it all back to me because they were like, holy crap, you've got no money. And when you're 29, 30 years old in debt, living with your parents, I mean, I met my wife at that time, so I'm surprised that she even like was interested. But you know, the whole, yeah, there was like there's a whole lot of sacrifice you go through. But those mountains, the technical skills that we were getting in climbing, I mean, we knew a lot of it. I mean, when you had like doing it from a young age, a lot of the skills are transferable in terms of the technical stuff. I think the mountains were just a marketing gimmick to try and generate some funds and interest. But a lot of that stuff too, we learned late. I mean, the internet is now gold in terms of our trekking business. But back then we were kind of just throwing things together. You know, Graham worked in Vodafone and went on to work in Google and works for TikTok. And so he has a background now. If we were starting now, we'd be on a far better plane, looking for money, looking for people interested. We were kind of just young and learning and doing all these things and not really understanding much about any of it.
How are you getting the advice? Like, who were there people that you were kind of getting in contact with that have done it? And
yeah, I mean, we spoke to a few. Like, I was always nervous because you start reading about all these other people that have climbed Everest, and like the 3 Irish people before I went up all nearly died. I mean, one was found behind a rock, you know, and you read her book. And I shouldn't say they're Irish, but 2 of them were technically English, but claim Irish. And there's plenty of that. I'm sure Irish, English, Scottish, Celtic, mix in all of us, but that come from there. But yeah, like she was found behind a rock There was another guy who went blind, a guy called Ian McKeever, who died on Kilimanjaro actually in 2013, hit by lightning, who set the world record for the 7 summits back in 2007. And then he almost died. Then there was another guy from Belfast who almost died. And you kind of like, you're thinking of all these things when you're doing it. Even when you're high on the mountain, you're like thinking about, you know, if I go up here and, you know, I can't, you know, move, I'm going to be dead. I mean, I'm sitting down beside Scott Fisher's body from the 1996 expedition. Like, his body's like right off the trail. And, you know, you're thinking about all these things that can go wrong. There was a Scottish climber who went blind, who nearly pulled us off the Knife Edge Ridge, you know, above the south summit, below the Hillary Step. There was 2 guys that came up, you know, behind us that were never seen again. Yeah, you kind of like always questioning whether you have the ability. And we were coming from a strong, I suppose, campcraft. Like, I've done so many trips, so many different things, but I've never been at altitude before. So there's always these questions in your mind about all of it, all of the preparation. All, you know, are we doing this way too quickly? Do we have enough experience? You know, and you're trying to, you know, you trying to keep your ego out of the equation. And really evaluate, you know, everything that we were doing, listening to everything that we were hearing from people. And everyone will always have their own agenda, you know, or their own perspective on a, you know, specific thing. So when you've done something once, and this is the challenge with the internet nowadays, is that, you know, some guy climbed Kilimanjaro once and he, you know, it was warm. Well, I can tell you just from doing 2 trips, the first trip was -10 Fahrenheit, which I don't even know what that is. It was freezing cold. And then last week, so we went up 8 days later, no wind, balmy. You know, I could have been standing there in a t-shirt. So you're trying to decipher all this information, like their experience versus what we think how are we playing up against each other.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to assess, like, you know, we're trying to take a scientific approach to the training, which I was a big believer in. If we can't benchmark ourselves against athletes and people that have, you know, done VO2 max testing, so we were like benchmarking our VO2 max, which is I don't want to get into it too much, but like professional soccer players are like 55. So people that play in the Premiership are at that level. So we were like, we need to be that or higher. And that's how our bodies are using oxygen and how efficiently they're using it. So like lung capacity, leg strength, body weight, all the different things that we had to accumulate into our training. We were seeking professional advice from the UK, from Ireland, from just stuff on the internet, but talking to people in the States. So there was just a range of different things, because you've got the technical stuff, you've got the altitude, you've got the physical preparation, and then you've got, you know, campcraft, hygiene, all the different smaller things. You know, like you get sunburns at altitude, and you get the shits, and it's a different game. Your performance you can't perform at a certain level. How do you perform for, like, you know, 12 hours straight? What sort of heart rates can I perform at for long periods of time? Well, you can only do that by testing your body. So like when I was training at the very height of my training. I was doing 3 hours a day in the gym, whether that's an hour on the Stairmaster, hour on the treadmill, and an hour of weights. And then mixing the weights up with like interval type training too towards the end. And then, you know, I was doing 8-hour days with 25 kilos on my back. I would set up a tent and sleep for 3 hours and then do another 8 hours with the weight, trying to cover, you know, 2, 3, 4,000 feet, you know, over 1,000 meters of elevation. Because when I was on Everest, I would have to do that day after day after day after day. So there was a lot of kind of hit and miss learning in there. But I mean, my resting heart rate could end to 38. I could do 12-hour days, you know, with no problem. But the mountains that we were doing leading up to it, I definitely struggled with. We were kind of not really understanding pacing at altitude, managing heart rates at altitude. So we learned a lot in those kind of pre-planning trips. I did certainly, that there's a certain pace you need to go at. If you train a certain way, this is the heart rate I need to be at to be able to perform consistently for this long, for this amount of time. And I honestly, the learning I got out of Everest was that the training that I was doing was making all the sense in the world. Because when I went to the top, I didn't, or on the whole trip, I didn't have a headache. I didn't have any issues. I had no altitude related problems. And I went to the top in 8 hours and back in 3. Where a normal summit, for a lot of people, it's like 12 hours just getting up there. But I put a lot of that down to the kind of very specific training in terms of honing the muscle fibers to be able to handle more stress and pressure at sea level. So when I take off the weight, I took off the weight off my backpack. My legs were so acutely trained to handle less oxygen getting to them. So the muscle fibers were like, okay, well, there's so much extra pressure and stress on the body. How do we, the muscles were like really honed in to that like level, those levels of lack of oxygen. And it's something I'm a big believer in now, is when I see people, even on Kilimanjaro, I saw like an Irish lady, she was 55, a little bit overweight, struggled on one of our Inca Trail trips, went away, trained with a backpack every day. And I'm not saying that's the only training people should be doing, but this was the core training. She went to Kilimanjaro and breezed up, no problem. The week later, I had an athlete, a triathlete, or he's an Ironman. He actually recently did 3 Ironmans back to back. Struggled on Kilimanjaro because he didn't do any of that type of training. He was probably fitter than any of us, but he didn't have when the muscle's under pressure, when there's 50% less oxygen getting into your body, if you haven't honed the leg strength or done the endurance in a very targeted and specific way, he was in trouble. And like literally, I'm holding his backpack to get him off the mountain, to get him back to the tent. So I'm a big. I learned so much from that trip that kind of led me to do what I do now. But it was
would you say that was one of the most important things? Like if someone's going to try and do one of these expeditions, then it's putting in the physical training beforehand. And
I think the 2 key things that are completely missed by everybody, going to Kilimanjaro or going to Everest Base Camp or trekking or climbing, is 2 things. Acclimatization is a massive factor. So there's so much more we know now about high altitude, which is like 3,500 meters to 5,500 meters. So that's the key. That's high altitude. Anything above 5,500 meters is extreme altitude. And when you think about it, nothing lives on the planet really above 5,500 meters. So I'm speaking to all these different audiences. I'll say meters and feet, and I'll mix them up. But nothing lives above that height. No one can permanently live above that elevation, 5,500 meters. So I think people don't understand that you need more time in the lower part of high altitude, which is 3,500 meters. If you fail to acclimatize well lower down, how can your body accept the lack of oxygen and the pressure difference when you move higher? So that's one thing that is completely missing. Like last week on Kili, there was these people flying past us. They skipped one of the important camps at 3,500 meters, moved on to the next one. And when we got there the next day after having 2 nights, half the group were shipped out with altitude sickness because they're jumping up to, almost 4,000 meters in 2 days from sea level. And that's just, you can't do that. And that's the biggest problem in the Himalayas now. There's helicopter rescues, not that anyone's there right now, but helicopter rescues every 10 minutes of people getting helicoptered out of the region because they're going up way too quickly at the lower realm of altitude and not taking the time to let the body understand, okay, there's not enough oxygen, I gotta let my body acclimatize. A simple example is if I take you from sea level to 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet, you can do well. Like you can maybe have a light headache, you might have an issue with, something small, but it's not gonna kill you, or but it can. It's dangerous enough. So you have to manage it correctly. But if I took you to 17,000 feet or 5,000 meters from sea level, and we tried to stay there, we'd be dead the next morning. And if I took you to the top of Everest, you'd be dead in 3 minutes. So it's cumulative. So it's like the Richter scale. You know, people say there was an earthquake at 5.0, and I was in the earthquake in Kathmandu when it hit, and that was a 7.8. So you think like there's not that much between 5 and 7 or 8 or 9, but they're exponentially worse. And the same is with altitude. The minute you step above that kind of 5,500 meter mark, it's Russian roulette really with your body. I mean, your body either adapts, and the increments that people are moving up sometimes are way too much, and that pressure differential is killing people in the Everest region. I mean, even on that peak that we do all the time, Island Peak at 6,000 meters, there's been a number of deaths on the mountain, and even video footage of people like just at 6,000 meters, like dead on the ropes. I mean, that shouldn't be happening. And it's all down to that one thing is acclimatization and knowing how to incrementally move higher. Like I've seen people fly into the Himalayas at 2,800 meters and get completely sick and have to be helicoptered out. I've seen people even lower than that, even in Kathmandu, showing signs of altitude sickness at 1,400 meters. So, because there's 88% of the oxygen. So it's all risky, and that has to be the biggest factor in what we're seeing nowadays, is that, 15 years ago, or when we were doing stuff, we were carrying all our gear. There was hikers, people were, used to hiking. Nowadays it's tourists. So it's all people who saw a video somewhere on YouTube and said, oh my God, yeah, I want to do that. But they've no concept of what it requires to do it. So it's become a kind of a tourist bucket list thing, and we see hundreds of people going to base camp, taking their selfie pics, taking their picture, and then trying to jump on a helicopter to get the hell out of there because they've no interest in doing the 3-day walk down.
Just to put it on Instagram.
Yeah, and that's a whole other conversation. But
yeah.
And I always go off on a tangent on that stuff. But yeah, look, I keep on talking, but I'll let you ask more questions.
no, that's really interesting. So that's the first main bit of advice, right? And then what's the second? So after acclimatization.
So the second one is physical preparation. It's funny, on Kilimanjaro last week, one of the guys, he's from North Carolina, he's like, film this. People don't realize, how hard this is. So I'm filming and me knowing, people are going to be sitting at home with a beer in their hand, looking at this guy walking down the side of a ski slope, and they'll have no concept of the angle. They'll have no concept of what it's like to walk at 17,000 feet or 5,000 meters. And the videos don't really help. So, yes, we have cool promotional videos on our YouTube channel, and everyone should watch them and be impressed with them. But the reality is, you have to train and you have to prepare for everything. You can't just wing it. And when I think about Kili especially, it's a big, big mountain with big ascents. Like we start from a little bit higher in our summit attempt from like 4,900 meters. So we go up 1,000 meters and then down 3,000. So if you haven't done any sort of like elevation drop in that level, like if your body's not used to walking down 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet, well, how are you going to manage yourself and stay safe on a mountain when you have to do that after doing 7 days on the mountain? So up in Kilimanjaro, we only do 8-day trips because if you come physically prepared, it's going to give everyone the best chance at safely reaching the top. Yeah. But people have to put in the physical preparation. These mountains are not they're not to be messed around with, and there's far too many people messing around on them these days. Like on the last trip, we were coming down, and all of the clients will testify, they're like shocked. Every single person we passed coming down off, we were moving from up towards a higher camp, and all these people had to bypass us on the way down to get back to their camp. Every single one of them had something wrong with them, which was normal on Kilimanjaro, absolutely normal. All of them were having their backpacks carried. One guy was completely hypoxic. He should have been on oxygen, and he was like completely out of it, like stumbling. and there was guys like helping them and carrying them, and everyone that came down, some people were being helped, carried, managed physically down the mountain, and pretty much all of them none of them had their backpacks on. Now, that might seem normal to some people, but that is horrendous. And all those people come down and they post on Instagram, "Oh, I got to the top of Kilimanjaro," but all the local guides are there busting their balls, carrying them down and carrying their backpacks down. So it's quite shocking to me. I mean, I've been there when we've had to carry bodies down and like walk up to people that are barely conscious. And I'm asking them, where is your guide? Like, he said, I don't know. And the guide has left them. And I was like, how many days have you been here? And he's like, 4. And I'm like, oh my God, you're at like 5,500 meters in 4 days and you can't stand up. I mean, if you can't stand up, how are you going to get down the mountain? If you can't walk physically down the mountain, how are you going to get out of there alive? Like, are you just going to rely on me or someone else to be able to help you down the mountain? And I think the mentality has shifted in how people approach these mountains. I think even on Everest has shown that people they're like, oh yeah, some 13-year-old went up. Well, it can't be that hard. And I have emails from tons of people that I went to Everest this season. Yeah, I couldn't get through the ice fall. They probably spent $60,000, and they're like, yeah, maybe I should start with something smaller. And I'm like, you read these emails, and myself and my wife are just like, holy crap. The mentality has just changed, and people see these things on the internet, and they're like, holy crap, that's cool. I want to do that. But then they're not willing to put in the preparation for what it takes. And it really is those two things. Acclimatization has to be spot on. Like the challenge with Kili, for example, is it costs about $450 per person per day to be on the mountain because the permit is over $1,000. Then you've got all these staff to pay. So every day you spend longer, it's going to cost you money. But if you don't spend the extra time, well, your chances of getting up high in the mountain are slim to none. So the success rates hover around 55% of people make it, and that's quite shocking but it's all down to money.
Is that people just want to rush it through then and try and do it?
Yeah, it's possible. Like I've climbed Kilimanjaro in 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, 8 days. It's possible, but the chances of being successful are dropped dramatically the more days you cut out.
Yeah.
But look, that's the reality of the world we live in anyway. Everyone's looking for quick fixes, shortcuts, cut corners. They just shouldn't be doing it on the world's mountain ranges. And these are all bigger conversations about who's allowing it, governments, policy, etc. But the reality is look, if people do two things, do very specific training for these peaks, because we're not running up and down, and we're walking at a very managed pace with a backpack on with weight. So you have to train in that manner, and I think that's probably with the acclimatization and specific training. If people just do those two things, a lot of the other things can be learned. How to sleep in a sleeping bag. I mean, you should probably do that before you come, but a lot of those things can be managed throughout. But those are the two key things that are so important for success.
And you've climbed Kilimanjaro more than 35 times, is that right? So
30, yeah. These last two was 36 and 37. So yeah.
And what do you think? Like, what have you learned between those early days when you first started going up to like last week, like when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to learn. I mean, you see stuff all the time. Things that we could do better for even our clients about trying to make sure that they're fully prepared. But now we're getting into the nitty gritty of not showing up, having not used your camelback, and having put used your hiking boots, and all these like little things that people should be doing before they come there. And that's where I kind of look at it now, because my perspective is on how do we get our clients, give them the best experience while accepting people that are not hikers on our trip. So it's a balance of trying to be more available. Like we've 40-page documents and we've tons of information on our website if people would read it, about how to prepare. But definitely the mountain, like Kilimanjaro, like, it's funny when I look at a picture and I show clients when we're at a camp called Karanga on day 5, we're looking up at the top and you can see the like depletion of the glaciers, and I'm showing them a picture from 2007, and then they're looking at the mountain and it's completely different. So the mountain has really changed quite a lot dramatically in the last 15 years in terms of and when all that water is gone, maybe there'll be a big monsoon between March and May every year, and there'll be random ice and water that flows down, and we have water to drink on the mountain. But that's going to change the game when all that ice is gone, and Kilimanjaro will be a mountain that will be a little bit harder to climb because there's going to be no water, and you need 4 to 5 liters of water every day just to drink, to mind cooking soups and food and managing on the mountain. So it's changing a lot in terms of the mountain. I think in terms of the people that are coming, it's a different mountain than it used to be. And it's, there's less understanding of mountain etiquette. Let's say people, like the last trip, there was a couple of guys kind of barging their way through our line, and I'm like, get the hell, and I see that on Everest. I mean, people fighting for position, fighting to get up these mountains. It's all individual efforts. It's not team efforts. It's not people working as a unit to achieve these goals. And we're trying to build that within the teams that we bring up. But it's changed a lot of the, and for me, it's always harder to manage, and you kind of take a lot of these things personally. But it's changing. I'll get more cynical as I do more of them, and I see more people grow up underprepared. But I think the beauty of the place is in the people. The experience that you get, and watching these guys carry heavy loads without complaining, getting about their work at 5 o'clock in the morning every day without complaining. There's a lot to be learned from these people who work hard for a living and are doing a lot of the work for you. And I think people see that when they do these things. I hope they just bring those kind of learnings home and bring them home to their home life. But amazing experiences. I mean, same in the Himalayas. I mean, you see these guys that are just like, pushing themselves right to the limit to support other people. I mean, there's nothing greater in life than to do that. And I suppose that's why we built the Everest School in Uganda, because that we were having all these privileges of climbing mountains all over the world, and we can do whatever we want pretty much, and that comes as a privilege. And it was probably the biggest learning for me. So whatever I see on the mountains and learn about specifics about training, preparation, gear, and all the learning that we learn from doing all these trips, the biggest learning for me was to watch people that we meet along the way and trying to help them in their journey. So like our head guide on Kili, we helped him set up a store. We've helped him buy a safari vehicle. We've helped staff buy land. We've helped people in Uganda and Nepal. We built 2 schools in Nepal. We've helped put stoves in homes. All of these people are the ones that help us achieve what we're trying to achieve in our lives. So it's important to be able to give back. And I think that's the biggest learning for me, was that, we saw a school in Uganda that, there was nothing when we went there in 2007. And then, watching all these children, the school grow from like 40 kids to over 200, and people move into these communities, and watching an organization support that through child sponsorship, through meals every day, through microfinancing projects, through trying to build societies and communities in Africa. I mean, that's humbling, and it's important to be a part of it, especially when all these people are doing so much for us. As yes, they're getting paid for it, but it's so much more than that. So I think the biggest learning for me is to always give back. If you're not giving back to the people that are helping you, I mean, you can do that.
Wrong there,
choice, but for me, it's so important to be involved in those projects, and that's what I enjoy doing for free when I'm not, doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah. And looking back on over 150 treks, or like leading 150 expeditions. I mean, if you had to pick, say, 3 locations or 3 treks, are there any that kind of spring to mind, or it varies?
Yeah, I mean, Kilimanjaro is going to be close to home now because I was just there with a bunch of our staff that's, you know, doing an amazing job, and are like family to me. So it's over the years, you know, I suppose we have 3 key locations that we work in Peru, in Nepal, and now Kilimanjaro. And I know you'll ask me about future projects and stuff like that, but I can mention some of them. But the reality is we're trying to focus on those people, and not trying to be doing too much in other places and outsourcing, but encourage these people to get involved in our business and get a cut of the business. So like our head guide in Kilimanjaro gets a cut of the business. He's not just getting paid. Same in Nepal, where like they're getting, we want to see that develop. Same in Peru, because those are like, I suppose, core values for us in terms of, if we invest in our people, well, then we'll be sustainable into the future. But if we don't invest in them, how are they're not going to know what I want from the trips, how to pace the groups, you know, encouraging clients to, you know, understanding our process of how we climb the mountain. Mm-hmm. Is super critical for us. So yeah, we're kind of invested in those 3 locations, and don't really plan on kind of building out. We build out within those regions. So like for example, in Peru, everyone does the 4-day Inca Trail along the famous trail. Yeah. But if you just do it a different way, like we have a 5-day itinerary, and you don't see anybody on the trail, and that's probably one of my favorite experience, like culturally, spiritually, that journey that those people were building through all these different climatic zones, through the Andes. Like the trail is absolutely phenomenal. And there's lots of companies that have done like the Inca Trail trips, and they're not even on the Inca Trail. Although there's thousands of Inca trails, but this one trail that's famous is amazing. Like it's absolute. Every time I do it, I'm like blown away of what these people were doing back, you know, 500-700 years ago on these trails in the mountains. And a lot of the things they built are still functioning. And it's quite mind-blowing, really. And to have the time, though, to really understand what they were doing, instead of just trying to rush people like through the experience. Mm. I think that's what we've kind of, by doing these things, and like I've done that trip, you know, 12 times or whatever, you kind of like start to feel, okay, well, there's more to this. Don't just follow what everyone else is doing. So that's one very special trip. I think the Everest trek for me is probably up there. I think, you know, people always argue that you don't get to spend that much time in base camp, although we have sleeping at base camp trips that people can go on. But the mountains and the scenery are just mind-blowing. The culture of the Sherpas, the people that work those trails, the Buddhist history, the monasteries, the mountains in itself. There's a very special feeling if you just take your time and not be rushing to get to the bakeries and have cappuccinos and be a part of the experience. The Everest region has a lot. The challenge, I suppose, is just so busy. And trying to find times when you can go there, whether it's March or November, when there's less people there, mm-hmm. It's kind of important. But I think, yeah, like Inca Trail, Everest Base Camp, and there's a reason that a lot of companies offer those trips, is because they are special. And if they're done right with more acclimatization and more time, they can be life-changing. I mean, when I went to Everest and put that T-shirt up in the bar in 2006, I mean, it changed my life, like literally. Not only did we climb Everest, but it opened up all these doors for whether it was speaking events or trekking or climbing or doing charity projects or getting involved in all these different things. Your life can be transformed by just stepping out of your comfort zone and taking on a bit of a physical challenge along with an emotional journey that you go on. They're life-changing for a lot of people. People will write to me and say, you know, that trip changed my life. And I've seen people that were completely unfit do a trip, struggle, do another trip, now train like 5 days a week, and they've probably added 10 years to their life. So by stepping out of and doing these types of trips, they can be life-changing. People, like a lot of people see like other people happy with nothing. And they're like, wow, holy crap, I've got everything that I could ever want. Yeah, probably I can be nice to have that nicer car or whatever. But it's humbling going and seeing these people just family orientated, living life, serving others. I mean, it's just that's what adventure should be for. It shouldn't be for that Instagram picture.
Yeah.
But I mightn't change hearts and minds on this conversation. But ultimately, that's what we're trying to achieve. Yes, we don't run it like a business. We run it as, if I ran it like a business, I wouldn't be doing this call right now. I'd be onto a marketing team going, why aren't I getting enough people booked into my trips? Like, it's not about that. It's about experiences, and it's about how the experiences can help you be better. Yeah. And that's ultimately what we want. And that's what myself and my wife are trying to, work into our trips. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve.
That's awesome. What about you personally now? So you're back in Colorado. Have you got any more trips kind of planned coming up shortly? Or?
We don't. I mean, we hope to be back in Kilimanjaro in June again. Mm-hmm. I think realistically, 2022 is the kind of what we're really looking towards. I know like 1 in 10 people in the States already have one of the vaccines or part of a vaccine. I still think it's going to take a long time. I mean, we were lucky. There's definitely risk in traveling during COVID, especially when not everyone's playing by the rules or doing the right thing. We're not sure whether we'll run very many trips in Nepal this season. We might do some private trips and some camping trips and some small things. But I think we're kind of working towards later in the year. Yeah. We have a few things, like we have a big this is a picture of Amadablam, which is like a 6,800 meter peak in the Himalayas in the Everest region, stunning peak. We've got a trip there in October. We've got a planned trip to Everest North Col, April 2022. But those are trips that we have clients that we have worked with for years that have climbed Elbrus in Russia with us in Kilimanjaro, and they've been building up or working with teams. Yeah. And we only want to bring teams and people we know and trust and seeing them on mountains to those bigger peaks. So we're randomly doing stuff like that. For me, I've done, 6 of the 7 summits. I mean, in my 20s and early 30s, I was keen to do it. One of our clients is like, yeah, if you help me with, this journey, I'll take you to Antarctica and pay for your trip. And like, it's a $50,000 trip that my wife probably wouldn't let me go on. And it's not that important to me anymore because people doing the 7 summits and, when I skied across Greenland or skied across Svalbard or do all these other things that I like to do, they're only adding value to what I do. I'm trying to make sure that we can give people experiences that are valuable to them. So, because nobody really cares if I, stand on the top of Everest or stand on the top of Kilimanjaro 50 times. People don't really like it, and people always ask, "Oh, did you get to the top?" And it's like, well, that's all they care about. So these experiences are personal experience, and it took you got to take your ego out of it and think, "Oh, everyone thinks you're great because you climbed Everest." Nobody really cares, and I've realized that now. So I don't have to it's not a big deal. It was something that I did that was important for me, and what does that lead to helping other people? Mm-hmm. And that's the learning of doing these things, but. Yeah, there's lots of other things I like to do, and we'd like to do, and we just really need to get, the pandemic under control and people to wear masks and follow the instructions and do all these things. But we'll get back there, and there's no rush. Adventures will be there. I think now is the time to plan for people. Yeah. So if anyone is looking to go to Kilimanjaro or looking to go to the Himalayas with us, and a lot of our trips are almost sold out in 2022. Already, so people are starting to think about getting back out there, getting out there, and yeah, if somebody's out there and they're like, you want to hire me for a talk or pay for my trip to Antarctica, I'm always open to listen to that. But the reality is, we're just trying to focus on our staff or what we're trying to do well in our key trips and focus on that.
Nice. And what's the best way to for people to reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. I mean, our website's iantaylortrekking.com or www.iantaylortrekking.com. Feel free to email me at ian@iantaylortrekking.com. And in comes the Murphy dog. And yeah, we'd love to talk to people. We're here 5 days a week, so we're only happy to pick up the phone and start talking about training, acclimatization, all the learning we've had on the mountains over the years. And happy to do it. Love to hear from people.
Amazing. Good, Ian. Thanks so much for your time. It's been great hearing your stories, and yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye out with what trips you have coming up, and yeah, we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Ollie, and good luck with all the stuff you're doing. It's great.
Thank you. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.